makes sense, right? You don't have refrigeration. You don't have transportation through most of human history. So cows typically are slaughtered on an as-needed basis. Hogs, historically, typically are slaughtered. Hogs and cows are both brought by Europeans to the New World. Hogs typically are slaughtered in the winter and then preserved. Crops that you would eat, grains, would be things that you grew locally. It's Chicago where that starts to change. Or part of what you see is that you are going to see humans, first Americans, begin to produce food that is produced hundreds, in time thousands of miles away from where you are standing. And this is part of what I mean when I say that the transformation of the way we live, and it's so second nature to us that we don't even notice it. This is one of the ways I think that's most profound. So grain. So this is a very early etching or painting of a grain. You can't really see it. I've got some better ones. This is late in the 19th century. The other one was from the 1830s, believe it or not. This is a grain elevator. So grain that's been brought in from the hinterland of Chicago, stored, is now being loaded into this strange little turtle-backed ship. And God knows where that's going to end up. That thing could end up in Mississippi. That thing could end up in Europe. I love this picture. This is from after the Second World War. But this is, again, astonishing. Look at the ship. Look at the size of it. That's an ocean-going ship. Loading in Chicago in these grain elevators. And this is a rail yard. So these are all trains. I mean, that's Chicago in one right there. And this picture, again, we're not talking like, I mean, God knows where the ship is headed. Look at the size, the scale of it. Loading up at a Chicago grain elevator. One of the things then that Chicago also invents, how do you market the Chicago Board of Trade? This is extraordinary. 1848, we're talking only a year after the opening of the Illinois and Michigan Canal, and at the very moment when the very first rail spurs are beginning to emanate out from Chicago, Chicago's already becoming a grain merchandising center. And a board of trade is set up actually to oversee and control. Merchants collaborate to store and sell grain. It's really in the Civil War that this takes off quite spectacularly because of the massive demand for feeding the Union Army. And so what actually happens, this is the trading floor of the Chicago Board of Trade. An amazing, this building, the last, is no longer there. But a spectacular trading floor of the Chicago Board of Exchange. They invent something that, again, is second nature to us, futures. Where you can actually buy wheat or buy corn that hasn't even been planted yet. You and I make a contract that I will pay you a certain amount for you to deliver a certain amount of grain to me next year. And there are also various, another word they invent, options. Options, futures. These are terms in the wake of the Wall Street debacle of recent times that probably aren't very popular with a lot of us. But this is where it's being invented. And what's happening, again, it's extraordinary to think about, right? Not only are we talking about a transformation from people eating what's produced where they are, to people eating stuff that's come from far, far, far away. But things like grain, an utterly material thing, it's becoming an abstraction. It's becoming a commodity that people are buying and selling before it even exists. Again, this is second nature to us. This is where it's being done. This is the Board of Trade now. You'll see this building. And that's the trading floor now. And they're still buying and selling futures and options on a lot of the same stuff. Pork bellies, wheat, corn, soybeans, and so forth. Second commodity chain, animals. Historically, most meat is consumed close to where it was killed because meat goes bad. What you start to see are new systems of transportation and of refrigeration, and meat packing will become one of the signatures of Chicago. As Carl Sandburg says in his poem, hog butcher to the world. Well, it was the hog butcher to the world and also the cattle butcher. This is the Union stockyards. This is also an extraordinary innovation. So historically, this is very funny to us because we think of farm animals and cities as not mixing. Historically, in most places, and in this country, in the middle of the 19th century at least, animals are in cities all the time. If you walk through the streets of Chicago or New York or Philadelphia, you'd see cows, you would see hogs rooting around through the trash and the slops and the gutters. That's how people live. Well, as Chicago is emerging as this large exchange place, right, the scale simply becomes impossible. People are bringing in entire herds of cattle to sell, marching them through the streets, and nobody, the entire city sort of brought to a halt. So they actually, in the 1860s, create a stockyard just outside the city's borders, the Union Stockyard, later incorporated into the city. Again, the scale is mind-blowing. And again, it's the Civil War is crucial. Procurement for the Union Army. By the 1870s, 5, then 10, and then 15 million cattle a year are being processed through the Union stockyard. Between 1893 and 1933, there is not a single year in which fewer than 15 million cattle are slaughtered in Union stockyard. That's 50,000 a day minimum. So you have 50,000 cows a day coming into the city, being processed out. Same thing's going on with hogs. You see the emergence of, again, things that are second nature to us. Slaughterhouses which are no longer, a sharecropper and his kids slaughtering and rendering a pig in the winter. But this, that's a hog. This is the scalding. First thing they do, they scald them, take the hair off them. So here you basically see an assembly line of pigs, right? Right before lunch. Have the barbecue. No.
Makes me hungry.
Okay. Assembly lines where the things are hanging vertically, moving through that. Again, that's all invented in Chicago. The companies that do this are still there. I bet you have all bought something from Swift, Bacon, Armour. One of the things that they do is they also invent refrigerated transport, also canning. You ever have a canned ham? This is where you got it. At least this is where they developed the idea. So again, think of, and just in Macomb, they're now doing the same thing with chickens right here. This is a revolution in how human beings eat, how we procure our food. Here you can see it happening before your eyes. Now, of course, it also produces, and remember this was one of the books that we handed out earlier, Upton Sinclair's Jungle, which is a kind of muckraking 1904 book showing the kind of horror of what's taking place inside these Chicago stockyards. This is one, don't read this book before you have a hot dog. No. One more commodity I want to look at very briefly that we don't normally think of in this term, lumber. The other thing that Chicago becomes is a center for wood. The wharf, that's not very here, right? Along the Chicago River, There are 12 miles of lumber wharfs. 12 miles. Basically, what's happening is the way in which people build houses is changed. I bet every one of us lives in a wood frame house. Maybe not. Some of you may have a brick house, right? A balloon frame house.
Yeah.
That's invented in Chicago. This is part of what's happening here. And you think about it, historically, houses were very hard to build. Because what you needed was you needed these huge timbers. They had to be hewed individually. You had to devise ways of creating joints to hold those timbers together. This is called a mortise and tenon. You've seen this, right? You needed exceptionally skilled carpenters to build a house. The way they typically would build a wall, they would build it on the ground. And then you would need 20 people to lift the thing up. Now, 1 or 2 people can build a house with very minimal carpentry skills